But I'd like to actually also take this occasion, and we made a special effort, Mary Grace and I, to make sure that the heads of the other two sister programs that were developed in Britain are here tonight. Professor Ian Nish, whom I've already referred to, was the British head of a very special 5-year program to work on a comprehensive, or at least a very large-scale, history of Anglo-Japanese relations. Now, that spread rather further than the Murayama initiative initially focused upon, to look more broadly, and I think this is primarily at the request of the Japanese side of historians. They wanted to look more broadly at 400 years of Japanese, Anglo-Japanese history, Anglo-Japanese relations, Anglo-Japanese social relations, and at the same time to have matching essays from the Japanese side and from the British side. Another person who is here today, and I don't know quite where she is right now, but Jane Flower over there, and I and Ian contributed to that in our capacities as historians. But the third leg of this program, this British side of the Murayama initiative, was a very special program which had been conceived even before the Murayama initiative got off the ground, and that was by a remarkable lady, Mrs. Keiko Holmes, who is over there sitting beside Jane Flower. Keiko, can you raise your hand so people can, lovely, thank you. Keiko was widowed. She was married to an Englishman, and she developed this remarkable program which she's called Agape. I probably have mispronounced it, but I'm sorry, but that's the nearest I can come to it, which is, it might suggest a kind of evangelical cast, but it is a special program in which she has taken out ex-prisoners, their wives, and taken them out to Japan to see firsthand what modern Japan is like. It's been a remarkable success. And in fact, although Pacific Venture and the Anglo-Japanese History Program and the Agape Program no longer are going to continue in as programs which are funded by the Japanese government and by private Japanese companies, nevertheless, Agape does still continue. And later on, when you're mingling, you might actually have a look at some literature that Keiko has brought tonight, because she is still recruiting ex-prisoners, now at very advanced age, and their widows, to go out to Japan. And the next trip, I believe, Keiko, is in October, isn't it, of this year. So there again, it's been a remarkable achievement. But all of these programs didn't really spring out of thin air. And I think it's wise and right that we should also see a somewhat longer context as well. Because from 1990, there was a real problem as the approach of the 1991 anniversary of the outbreak of the Pacific War was in prospect. There was a real prospect that there would be lots of demonstrations hostile to Japan by ex-prisoners, that there would be perhaps even a certain amount of, really unpleasant demonstrations. There had been unpleasant demonstrations previously. And there was concern in the British government and the Japanese government as to what could be done to, in some way, counteract that by a more positive image, but also an honest and straightforward image. And a number of people were asked their opinions. I was asked for my opinions. I gave them. And I was asked by the Foreign Office to put it in writing. Well, I've been enough of an historian, been enough in the archives to realize what happens when outsiders are invited to put forward views. And what usually happens is they become Aunt Sally's, and I really didn't want that. So I told them, no, I'm sorry, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that unless I was pushing against an open door. And it took about 6 months before I was finally persuaded to put something down in writing, and it was adopted and endorsed by the British government with the encouragement of a remarkable head of the political section in the embassy, Minister Numata, and his political counselor, Mr. Yamanaka. And I hold those people in the highest possible regard. This became effectively government policy, British government policy. There was a rather more ambivalent attitude on the part of the Japanese, but the idea was for a kind of Pacific War Memorial foundation, which it was hoped would actually lead to people seeing the benevolent side of Japan and to help deal with the medical and psychiatric sequelae of the war, and also the ordinary geriatric problems of the time, of elderly people. It was hoped that this would save enough money so that possibly, the British Treasury, right, the Exchequer, would be persuaded to offer some kind of a gratuity, some kind of a cash benefit to the ex-prisoners, so that for the first time they would not be effectively ignored and humiliated by the veil of silence and by this idea that somehow the peace treaty had settled everything. Of course it did, in many, many ways settle everything, but that there could not be any special compensation, and certainly nothing from the British government. It took a long time to gain the cooperation of the majority of the ex-prisoner community and their associations, clubs, and societies. But that was done, and there was a very special partnership that developed between the civilian internee organization that was formed for this purpose, which became ABCIPHER, and also the National Confederation, National Association for British Prisoner of War Clubs and Associations, National Federation, NIFCA, anyway. That and the Malayan Campaign Officers Association, there were a number of leaders of these different organizations who worked tirelessly to try to promote this kind of what they called financial reconciliation. Well, that ultimately failed. But it was as a result of the coming together of those individuals. They were the people to whom I turned when trying to decide whether or not Pacific Venture would be a viable program. They were the ones who delivered and who actually promoted the idea of Pacific Venture to the ex-prisoner community. They put themselves, essentially their reputations, on the line for us, and actually saying this was a program which could be supported and which was different from anything else that had been tried before. So I hope that you will actually join me at least in thanking in your hearts those people and their efforts. They have almost all passed away, the individuals who were involved in that, but they played a very, very special part in the unfolding of everything that is now coming to its natural conclusion tonight. But when I say it's a conclusion, also remember that we are a cadre. We all essentially know groups of each other. We all have certain points in contact. And I hope very much that the embassy will continue to invite members of our group to receptions and things like that from time to time, if that's possible, because we are special. And at least 3 or 4 people each year have gone on to specialize in Japanese studies out of the 20 or 40 people a year who have gone on these programs. Anyway, that's all I have to say. And thank you very, very much for doing your part in this remarkable adventure. Thank you.